Good evening, this is Goldie, also known as Mr. Anecdotal, Mr. Pasty, and the Talking Head in the secure location. It's Wednesday, December 1st, 2010. Remember, most importantly, I rant so you don't have to. Sorry for the technical difficulties last week. That broadcast is now up and is called Congressional Committees Number 1. I've got a live studio audience here today, Camp Dogmore, as you may know, so there might be some noises that I can't control. I've put Glenn Beck and Judge Napolitano's emails up here on the rant, so you can see that next week on the email alert if you want to send them messages, which I recommend. Here's a brief summary of what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to talk about education in response to my ACC exploding head rant. I'm going to talk about Wikipedia. I'm going to talk about Wikileaks. I'm going to talk about a terror suspect being found guilty in federal court and not in a military tribunal without the use of torture-acquired evidence. And I'm going to talk about the world commons in relationship to the burning of coal. So I was talking to some progressive friends this past weekend, and they brought up a point about Austin Community College, or the Goldie's exploding head subject. If you remember, the Austin American-Statesman had penned an editorial supporting ACC's expansion into adjoining counties, spewing about 10 lies in doing so, and Goldie lost it. My head exploded. My friends, my progressive friends, said one advantage is that people get a second chance to be able to transfer into the University of Texas, and they knew several people who had. They get a second chance to get into a taxpayer-funded public university, to major in English and come out with, and what? What do they come out with? My friend from up north of Dallas asked me, where would you be without public education? He's actually helping me solidify the questions, because that's the big part of what we need to do here, is actually come up with the questions. Sometimes the answers are pretty easy if you can actually come up with the questions. I don't actually care where I would be without public education. We're here now, and we have to deal with two main things. What do we do with the kids that we have alive now, and what do we do with the as yet not conceived children? I mean, think about the first part, literally. How dare you put this question to me? Well, we have all these kids now, so what do we do with them? Can't just abandon them. It's like putting us in Iraq and then leaving me with the cleanup. You just can't leave Iraq. I mean, what will happen? So again, there are two parts. What do we do with the kids we have now, who are alive now, and do we tell the future parents of children as to how much help they are going to get raising their as of yet unborn children? We cannot confuse the two, because they are two totally separate issues. I can understand why I might be convinced that it is cheaper to babysit these kids in public schools than it is to have them stay at home. Some of them learn and then have them enter the workforce a lot earlier and compete with what are already very scarce job openings, even at Walmart. But that is different from telling my next door neighbor that if they get pregnant tonight, they're getting zero assistance from other taxpayers as to their child's upbringing, education, food, shelter, clothing, student loans, and housing. Will they make a different decision as to whether or not to have that child? Let's keep the two issues separate. I'm trying to develop a theory of personal responsibility as to people that have children, so that they understand the consequences of their selfish, and I don't mean it in the bad way, the consequences of their selfish action to have a child. I don't want any complaining from them when they have crappy lives and no money. But obviously they're going to get the benefit of having a child and getting some immortality or whatever the heck reason it is to have a child. The other part, where I want to abolish public education, is helping us really get to the heart of what schooling is and is supposed to be doing. They are separate issues, and let's keep them separate. I was speaking with another friend of mine last Sunday, and we talked about a lot of subjects. There's a good old friend of mine from Houston. He stated that no one makes the decision to have kids assuming that society is going to take care of the kids. He's a PhD. All right? I'm not going to say that he's extremely intelligent, but he is. Okay? So he stated that no one makes the decision to have kids assuming that society is going to take care of the kids. All right, I completely disagreed, as you might expect, and I stated that I think everyone makes the decision to have kids knowing that there is public school, soon to be public health care, school lunches, tax breaks, and student loans. I think everybody makes that decision based on that. Everyone. I don't think there's a single person that doesn't make the decision based on those issues, those things that they're going to get. If they knew they were going to pay, we would have, I don't know, how many less kids? I guess send me an email if you think that if you knew all of these items and how much it was going to cost you to have a child, would you have it? And if nobody was going to help you. Okay. Separately, and going back to the first issue of what do we do with the kids that are alive today, excuse me, and need to be educated in some other manner than is occurring now, since Goldy believes the system is broken. Judge Napolitano on Freedom Watch on Fox Business Network had Janine Turner on the show on Tuesday, November 30th. Janine is an actor from the show Northern Exposure. She started a foundation to teach children about the Constitution, called Constituting America. She was saying stuff like, sit down with the children, no matter how young, read the Constitution with them, grab them with a song or a short film. It was very, very cool. This fits right into one of my side theories where I said stop teaching everything except modern American history from the present backwards. Always relate back to the Constitution or amendments. Count backwards. Do math. Do English. Do science. Evolution, creationism, discussion in current Texas textbooks, by the way. Solely in relation to the present U.S. history. So they will always be related to what is going on today. Educate the kids now in the most important subject of all, civic duty to govern and be governed correctly and intelligently. She's got a great thing there. She's got a van that's cruising around, and it's a non-governmental solution. It fits in with what Goldy believes. I then brought up Wikipedia to my buddy from Houston, and he said he had actually written a page. I said Wikipedia is an interesting commons that is not treated like a commons. A lot of people participate in making this commons better for intellectual reward, or as my buddy put it, we just want it to be right. That's what his son told him. I can't really figure it out because I have no desire to update it, me personally, but I want it to be right. Another friend in Austin said that Wikipedia is an example of socialist behavior that works. Okay, Wikipedia themselves define socialism as socialism is an economic and political theory advocating public or common ownership and cooperative management of the means of production and allocation of resources. As an economic system, socialism is a system of production based on the direct production of use values by allocating economic inputs, the means of production, and investments through planning to directly satisfy economic demand. Economic calculations based on either calculation in kind or a direct measure of labor, time, output for individual consumption, in kind, or a direct measure of labor time. Output for individual consumption is distributed through markets, and distribution of income is based on individual merit or individual contribution. Sorry, buddy, it looks like this is not really socialism. These Wikipedia pages are put up voluntarily, not through any plan. All can use it. All can update it, and there are self-described checkers looking at all new posts. Solely, it seems like, solely for the personal gain of the prestige of being a watchdog. Wikipedia is a commons, however, I think, and is not destroyed by multiple use without payment, but enhanced. You know, if you think of the old example of the commons, which was a whole bunch of people run their cattle on the land, they don't pay, the land gets destroyed, and erosion happens, and the commons is destroyed. So private property works better for the running of cattle. So that's not really what happens with Wikipedia. It may not even be a commons, but it's really a system of common ownership, even though it is owned. The items themselves are a system of common ownership. Cooperative management, certainly, because all kinds of people are cooperating to manage this thing and keep these things correct. And personal gain. So there's personal gain through a shared goal of we want it to be right. Let's keep looking at this thing, this monster, this what I call commons, because I sure love using it. Progressives. Watch Judge Napolitano on Freedom Watch on Fox Business Network. for 5 nights in a row at 7 o'clock Central. That's your duty. He's not always right, but he is freaking pure. He was hammering Congressman Connie Mack on November 30, 2010, talking about Wikileaks. And, in quotes, don't we have the right to know that when we call Saudi Arabia an ally on one hand, and on the other hand, have knowledge of a different Saudi ruling family member giving money to Al-Qaeda? Don't we have a right to know? The judge hammers the point home, and he is right. When was somebody, and think about this, when was someone actually right on TV? On Fox? Actually, South Park is generally right. They usually come down on the least stupid side of an issue, if they pick a side at all. For those of you that don't know, Julian Assange, the Wikileaks founder, released a whole bunch of new classified documents. And I have 3 things to say about that. 1, the 4th undeclared war that we have spoken of in Yemen is occurring. 2, it appears that Hillary Clinton may have broken the law by requesting espionage on the UN. And 3, assume all writings will end up in the public sphere. Now that means you, all emails, all of your talks on the phone, all of these rants, they will end up in the public sphere. Let me fix a typo there on the word public. Okay. Michelle Bachmann, Tea Party favorite, was confronted by Judge Napolitano. And she said that the WikiLeaks type of thing cannot jeopardize American troops. So she certainly is, that's more of a Republican entrenched viewpoint. Or Democratic. He pushed her on, quotes, let's say a foreign war we don't know about, close quotes. She waffled. It's a new age. We're working under the Espionage Act of 1917 or 1918, whatever it is. We need new firewalls. Every government has secrets. This is like a prime Tea Party person, okay? What did I tell you about these Tea Partiers? The Tea Party is co-opted. It is a part of the Republican Party, a part of the war machine, a part of the structural regulatory defect that allows defense contractors to push policy and products to their donees, every federal elected official. But we must use them when we can for what we need. They are not a valid third party, except to get elected. Judge Napolitano eloquently and bluntly stated, and this is about really WikiLeaks, and he was upset about this, and the guy's tone of voice never changes, by the way. It always sounds like he's upset. So he very eloquently and bluntly stated, when innocents die in our name, we have a right to know. I could not have possibly thought up a better statement. Tom Hartman on Free Speech TV said, if our investigative media had been doing its job, WikiLeaks would not have happened. They're both right. Media is pitiful. They don't investigate anymore. Remember, they were embedded in Iraq. I'm fine with WikiLeaks, big time. I would wish that they would redact names, which they have done, to avoid any bloodshed or risks to any informants, etc. But the guy who did the actual leaking is being tortured, I'm sure, and will go to jail, or if Huckabee has his way, executed. So much for being a Christian or a Christian nation, by the way, Huckabee. The big picture is that it shows to the American public, those that can or choose to read any of the WikiLeaks, that their government lies all the time to them about everything. Hillary Clinton should be upset. She may have broken laws. And Obama should be upset. If he ordered her to do it, which he obviously did, then he has broken laws. Maybe. I better put a maybe in there, huh? Ow. And you were worried about frivolous impeachment proceedings by the new Republican House of Representatives in January? All right, the judge isn't always right. He does fail his purity argument when he was talking about regulation of food and the destruction of a huge amount of tomatoes following the scare of last year. He said, why does some government bureaucrat think he knows more about the food than the person growing it? Judge, you were doing so well. As an example, ConAgra gives donations to most every elected federal legislator in America. Definitely gives huge amounts to crop-growing states in which it has an interest. We never hear the judge speak of this large part of the defect of regulation. Keep sending him emails. The guy is a great voice. Let's not lose track, okay, of this guy. And commend him on his support for Wikileaks and the public's right to know, which overrides all else. A very pure and important First Amendment declaration. He's great. All right. It's water. An article in the Statesman dated November 17, 2010 shows the problems of torture. It's entitled, Britain Pays Abuse Claims by Former U.S. Detainees. In the article, it details how Britain has agreed to pay hefty settlements to former Guantanamo Bay detainees who sued the British government for alleged complicity in their torture. This is British subjects, by the way. In a joint statement, Britain's domestic spy agency, MI5, and its overseas intelligence service, MI6, said the settlement would allow both agencies to concentrate on protecting national security. British spies haven't been accused of torturing detainees themselves, but former detainees have alleged that British officials violated international law by knowing about the abuse and doing nothing to stop it. Britain has long opposed some of the interrogation techniques authorized by Bush after the 9/11 attacks, saying they can produce false information as suspects eventually say anything to make the abuse stop. We all already know that. Well. How much are we taxpayers going to owe due to the eventual lawsuits against us, the U.S. citizens, especially where our people actually did the torture? So you may have heard about the civilian jury acquitting a terror suspect recently. If you're watching Fox, you're getting the look at the failure of Obama, look at the failure of his policies to protect us, look at this failure of a president. In terms of this particular story dated November 17, 2010 by Benjamin Weiser in the New York Times entitled, Civilian Jury Acquits Terror Suspect of All But One Charge. Notice first that the media and the idiot pundits have been misusing the message word civil justice system. In the New York Times article, the use of the word civilian is correctly used to denote a non-military trial. In the U.S., the distinction is between a civil trial, for example, a monetary dispute between parties, contract claim, versus a criminal trial, jail time, etc., for a murder. That's the two distinctions, a civil trial and a criminal trial. In any event, the article details a former Guantanamo detainee that was found guilty of conspiracy, Ahmed Galani. He was acquitted on 280 other counts, mainly due to torture being used to elicit evidence. Fox has been screaming that this trial was a failure. From the article, and I'm going to read for a little bit here. The first former Guantanamo detainee to be tried in a civilian court was acquitted on Wednesday of all but one of more than 280 charges of conspiracy and murder in the 1998 terrorist bombings of the United States embassies in Nairobi, Kenya, and Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. The case has been seen as a test of President Obama's goal of trying detainees in federal court whenever feasible, and the results seem certain to fuel debate over whether civilian courts are appropriate for trying terrorists. Okay, just how they put that, you know where their message is going on this thing. The defendant, Ahmad Khalfan Galani, 36, was convicted of one count of conspiracy to destroy government buildings and property. He was acquitted of 4 counts of conspiracy, including conspiring to kill Americans and to use weapons of mass destruction. Because of the unusual circumstances of Mr. Galani's case, after he was captured in Pakistan in 2004, he was held for nearly 5 years in a so-called black site run by the CIA and at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. The prosecution faced significant legal hurdles, even getting his case to trial. But they did. On the eve of Mr. Galani's trial last month, the government lost a key ruling that may have seriously damaged its chances of winning convictions. But it didn't. In the ruling, the judge, Louis A. Kaplan of Federal District Court in Manhattan, barred prosecutors from using an important witness against Mr. Galani because the government had learned about the man through Mr. Galani's interrogation, torture, while he was in CIA custody, where his lawyers say he was tortured. The witness, Hussein Abibi, would have testified that he had sold Mr. Galani the TNT used to blow up the embassy in Dar es Salaam, prosecutors told the judge, calling him a giant witness for the government. The judge himself recognized the significance of excluding the witness when he said in his ruling that Mr. Galani's status of enemy combatant probably would permit his detention as something akin to a prisoner of war until hostilities between the United States and al-Qaeda and the Taliban end, even if he were found not guilty. The first part of that is worse than the second part. The second part is still terrible. Let's reread that. His status of enemy combatant probably would permit his detention as something akin to a prisoner of war until hostilities between the United States and Al-Qaeda and the Taliban end, which is never. Judge, never. Here's the worst part, even if he were found not guilty. So that means they would have held him if he were found not guilty? Okay, I'm not upset with that. He was found guilty, all right? Mr. Goldy, who remains in custody, faces 20 years to life in prison when he is sentenced on January 25th. Mr. Goldy's trial, prosecutors chose not to introduce any of the statements Mr. Goldy made when he was interrogated, tortured, while in CIA custody and at Guantanamo, although prosecutors told the judge the statements amounted to a confession of his role in the embassy plot. Really? Defense lawyers argued that the statements had been coerced and were inadmissible. Judge Kaplan told the jurors they had demonstrated that American justice can be rendered calmly, deliberately, and fairly by ordinary people, people who are not beholden to any government, not even ours. It can be rendered with fidelity to the Constitution, he added. You have a right to be proud of your service in this case. So, if you do something other than listen to the critics of this case, and I guess they wanted a death sentence or 280 life sentences or anything short of that would be a failure, you will see that the government's continued use of torture only harms the cases in front of them, besides, of course, knowing that torture does not work. However, I think this is an optimistic victory for everyone. As painful as that statement up there was, that this guy would be held forever if he's found not guilty. We have not used military tribunals. The defendant had lawyers and was found guilty. Torture-extracted testimony was thrown out. And we don't have as much shame as we would have if a secret military tribunal had found him guilty and sent him for a summary execution. Ignore the critics. This is close to how the system is supposed to work. Sorry. Maybe it's a good idea. All right, this is something totally different. You'd heard that the unemployment benefits expired last night at midnight. And I should get some mail for this. Maybe it's a good idea to allow the unemployment benefits to expire, as they did last night at midnight for millions of Americans, so that we can get used to figuring out non-governmental solutions to our giant fiscal problems. For example, many of these people will have to move back in with family or friends, and will have to ask for help from people or entities other than the government. In the October 21st, 2010 Austin American Statesman, Britain unveils sharp spending cuts. The article details that Britain was to eliminate 500,000 jobs due to steep spending cuts. What are you going to do with these people? Britain's public deficit is one of the highest among developed countries, running at 11.5% of total economic output, compared with 10.7% for the U.S. So Britain was 11.5% of total economic output, compared with 10.7% is the deficit, and 5.4% for Germany. Today on Fox, they're talking about the elimination of U.S. unemployment benefits for 2 million Americans, and they will not mention the threat of filibuster by the Republicans. Only the failure of the Senate and the Obama administration. I watch Fox so you don't have to. Hey, Republicans, if you gain the presidency and the Senate in 2012 and you eliminate all these federal employees, as you claim, what are you going to do with all these people? Yes, Goldy was right. We need to work. There's a slight digression on this, but we do need to work on land use law to make it easier for multi-generational families to move back into their parents' or children's properties. An editorial from the Chicago Tribune dated September 10th, 2010, quotes, "Enjoy the not-so-empty nest," close quotes, is a good article on this. It's a lighthearted piece stating that more and more people are returning to their homes during the recession. Multi-generational homes used to be the common in the U.S., often treasured for the bonds between Mama and her grandchildren down the hall. In 1940, nearly 1/4 of American homes were multi-generational, according to the Pew Research Center. And though the number declined until 1980, it has been on the rise ever since 1980. What happened in 1980, by the way? In 2008, 49 million Americans, 16.1% of the population, lived in multi-generational homes. The recession boosted the number of these households by 2.6 million from 2007 to 2008, Pew found. As I've lobbied the city of Austin, instead of making it more difficult to build garage apartments and granny flats, which are separate units from the main house, the city and cities all over the nation should be making it easier to build these types of units that allow people to take advantage of what they have. It will help with child care and old age care as well. All right, it seems like a good argument against the precursor to universal health care called Obamacare is that once you give universal health care, and the government has the preeminent role in the delivery and payment of that health care, then the government gains a legitimate interest in the cleanliness of the air, coal plant scrubbers, or wastewater plants, dumping untreated sludge back in the waterways, or anything that affects health. Wow. That's actually a really far-reaching implication. That's kind of scary. Related to that implication is the ability of the federal government to regulate due to that interest, which directly relates to our country's relationship to the world commons. There was a UN climate change conference in Cancun, Mexico this past week. Fox reported that the mood has changed, or as Goldie has said, the fat is gone. It's been easy for those of us in the U.S. to say that we want to unilaterally impose tougher environmental regulations on ourselves in the form of the Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, cap and trade. However, that was during a time of fat in our economy. There is no more fat. When we think of self-limiting our environment and CO2 emissions, we must always state that this will cost the individual polluter money. Just always state it. No reason to give it more credence, but just state it. It will. I'd always said that once we had a healthcare interest in the effects of bad emissions, we have an interest to regulate and make these emissions less harmful to the environment and make these emissions contribute less to the healthcare costs of those affected by these emissions. Makes sense. I'd always assumed anecdotally that these bad emissions did contribute in asthma, lung cancer, and various other lung ailments. And I'm only using coal as an easy example, as well as various cancers from the air and waterborne carcinogens created in this burning. My friend from Houston asked me, how do we measure these healthcare costs? I have no answer to that. However, that's a side digression. My main point is that we are competing against the government of China in determining our electric costs as affected by environmental regulations. We're not competing against the coal plants. We're not competing against the producers of products. We're competing against the government of China. That's a strange thing, something we need to always think about. As they have less environmental controls and minimal health care, their cost of producing goods is less versus the U.S., where we have an interest in health care and environmental regulation, obviously subject to the structural regulatory defect that allows these polluters to write their own regulations. There is some environmental regulation. The following pieces are from an article from the New York Times, November 21st, 2010, by Elizabeth Rosenthal, talking about this coal thing. Hang on. Even as developed countries close or limit the construction of coal-fired power plants out of concern over pollution and climate warming emissions, coal has found a rapidly expanding market elsewhere, Asia, particularly China. At ports in Canada, Australia, Indonesia, Colombia, and South Africa, ships are lining up to load coal for furnaces in China, which has evolved virtually overnight from a coal exporter to one of the world's leading purchasers. The United States now ships coal to China via Canada, but coal companies are scouting for new loading ports in Washington State. New mines are being planned for the Rockies and the Pacific Northwest. Indeed, some of the world's more environmentally progressive regions are nascent epicenters of the new coal export trade, creating political tensions between business and environmental goals. I didn't really talk about what those environmental goals were, because there's now new environmental goals, which we'll talk about. Traditionally, coal is burned near where it is mined, particularly so-called thermal or steaming coal used for heat and electricity. But in the last few years, long-distance international coal exports have been surging because of China's galloping economy, which now burns half of the 6 billion tons of coal used globally each year. As a result, not only are the pollutants that developed countries have tried to reduce finding their way into the atmosphere anyway, but ships chugging halfway around the globe are spewing still more. The pollutants are finding their way into the atmosphere anyway. That is the key point. Quotes, "This is a worst-case scenario," close quotes, said David Graham Casso, spokesman for the Sierra Club, which estimates that its Beyond Coal campaign has helped to block 139 proposed coal plants in the United States over the last few years. We don't want this coal burned here, but we don't want it burned at all. This is undermining everything we've accomplished, close quotes. In Australia, environmental groups have repeatedly halted trainloads of coal headed to the export docks at Newcastle this fall, and flotillas of kayaking protesters have delayed cargo pickups by Asia-bound coal ships. I have to ask, is there a line that needs to be drawn somewhere? Doesn't someone own the coal that they are stopping from being shipped? Isn't someone's private property right being taken without compensation? Julia Gillard, Australia's newly elected Prime Minister, promised during her campaign to put a price on carbon. In other words, make companies pay in some way for excessive carbon dioxide emissions. But environmentalists say that such laws will be meaningless if the country continues its nascent coal rush and exports global warming to the world, as one group, Rising Tide Australia, puts it. It's a good point. This summer, an Australian company signed a $60 billion contract with the state enterprise China Power International Development to supply coal to Chinese power stations beginning in 2013 from a vast complex of mines called China First to be built in the Australian outback. It was Australia's largest export contract ever, the company said. The deal points to the love-hate relationship many wealthier countries have with coal. While environmental laws have made it progressively harder to build new coal-fired power plants, they do not restrict coal mining to the same extent. And they shouldn't. In Washington state, the Port of Tacoma said Friday that it would not host a proposed coal loading plant, citing a multitude of business and community factors. This week, officials in Cowlitz County are expected to decide whether to grant a permit for a proposed coal port in Longview on the border with Oregon, which will cost a lot of jobs if it doesn't happen. Again, I'm not saying which is right, but say what is going to actually happen when you do that. Environmental groups will be there to oppose the port, noting that policies in both states effectively block new coal-fired plants, and that both have plans to close the few that remain. It's one step forward, 10 steps back if we allow coal export in our region, said Brett Vanden Heuvel, executive director of the environmental group Columbia Riverkeeper. This is painful. The growth and shifts in coal exports to China are impressive, flowering even during the recession. Seaborne trade in thermal coal rose to about 690 million tons this year, up from 385 million in 2001. And in Europe and the United States, coal seems past its prime, with consumption generally down from 5 years ago because of the recession, environmental laws, and a greater reliance on natural gas and renewable energy. I've put the link to this article so you can see it directly. All right. What I'm trying to do in looking at these facts and figures and the new issue of worrying about the pollution on the other side of the world is to show that unilateral controls may have no effect on the total amount of global warming in the world commons. Without a world government with teeth, which I don't want, it's possible that the most you can do is find a way to measure the cost of emissions to your sovereign nation and determine the total costs of an emission, including healthcare costs. At that point, you can then determine whether or not you will have the most stringent controls here or some lesser amount of controls that still compensates for the increased external costs, or as Garrett Hardin put it, commonized costs, privatized profits gain. When we talk about just inside the borders of the United States, the analysis of the commons is so much easier. We need government to regulate it, or it won't get regulated. That's in this country. The world commons of air is another matter. Air respects no borders. China plus India, plus Russia, plus Japan, plus Europe, plus South America, plus Mexico, plus Canada, plus the United States equals most of the air that is breathed. Should people in coal-producing regions literally starve so that China does not burn that particular coal? Pledges to reduce emissions works during times of plenty. Pledges work, sorry, should be no S there. During times of plenty. During this global depression, there will be no pledges. Let's keep looking at that. That world commons thing is not easy, and I don't know an answer. Digressing pleasantly, Facebook is a small community. It's like a small town with everybody gossiping. In the old days, in small towns with small communities, you couldn't go out with anyone or break up with anyone and not have the whole town talking about it. Then people moved to the cities and became anonymous, except for their actual friends, real friends. You could go out with somebody and not have anyone ever find out about it. Then came Facebook. You can't friend someone or have pictures on there with someone and not have every friend see exactly what you're doing. It's like a small town all over again that you cannot escape. That was talking about a friend of mine, not me. All right, from a friend in Atlanta, an email that I liked. From one elitist to another, don't you ever back down. Stay in their face. Keep speaking the truth. And let them know you are well aware the emperor has no clothes. You're my hero. That's all there is today. I want to thank our sponsors, all of which support this form of conversation, but not necessarily the content of this conversation. pianobyangelo.com. Angelo Limbesi's, who teaches and plays keyboards all over Austin. ZetaDesign.com for all of your decorative painting needs. She can make anything look like anything. AustinAreaPlumbing.com for all of your Austin plumbing problems. TicoAdventureLodge.com, T-I-C-O AdventureLodge.com, a small hotel in Samara, Costa Rica. CNC Surf School in Samara at www.cncsurfsamara.webs.com. La Vela Latina, a great sunset restaurant in Samara. And it's a great lunch restaurant as well. Amhar Tequila at www.santospirits.com, an extremely smooth tequila. Another cool little hotel in Samara at www.villablancasamara.com, and our newest sponsor, The Delicate Genius in Houston. Thanks and God bless. And there may be a broadcast, special broadcast on Sunday. I will send an email out for that if it's going to happen. We may be discussing the Fed because we're trying to understand it before we can opine on it. Thank you very much.